You're listening to the Unlocking Africa podcast.
We have a network of over 1,500 experts in 24 markets in the continent. So on a personal level, I am hugely passionate about Africa, and I dedicate every ounce of my being to make a contribution to the continent. Retail in Africa, like many aspects of Africa, is highly dynamic, is highly nuanced. This challenge that you raise is one that is changing at a rapid pace. From the African retail perspective, there is always going to be informal and modern trade.
Stay tuned as we bring you inspiring people who are unlocking Africa's economic potential. You're listening to the Unlocking Africa podcast with your host, Tessa Adamu.
Welcome to the Unlocking Africa podcast, where we find brilliant people who are doing brilliant things to unlock Africa's economic potential. Today, we have a very special guest, Mabidilala, who is head of research at Trade Intelligence, also founder and CEO at Pengo Insight. Welcome to the podcast, Mac.
Thank you for the invite. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
How things going in South Africa? Is it Durban that you're based?
I'm based just outside of Cape Town in a small town called Stellenbosch, out in the Western Cape.
Fantastic. How's the weather?
It's actually great today. It's about 34 degrees and we are going into autumn. So the oak trees around Stellenbosch are, starting to shed their leaves. But it's just a gorgeous day and a gorgeous time of the season.
It's actually getting quite bright and sunny here as well, but it's still freezing. I'm sure you're not jealous of our UK weather.
No.
So I mentioned that you split your time between Trade Intelligence and Pengo Insight. So I was hoping you could introduce yourself and tell us a bit more about who Mac is.
Sure, I'm happy to do so. So as you have mentioned, I kind of wear a couple of hats in my professional career. Being founder of Pengo Insight, which is a expert network focused on Africa. So we have a network of over 1,500 experts in 24 markets in the continent. These are local consultants who we match up with global consultancy firms who are conducting a wide array of primary research on African markets. And then, of course, the other sort of chunk of my time I spend at Trade Intelligence as head of research. And Trade Intelligence really is a leading research and capability solutions company. We are fortunate enough to work with the top 40 consumer goods clients in South Africa with research on the retail sector mainly. And we are more and more starting to provide solutions for our clients broader into Africa. What sets us apart as Trade Intelligence is that we chiefly focus on the retailer perspective, so we would profile each of the prominent retailers from a corporate retail perspective, but also the informal sector. And we help our clients to understand the specific retailer strategies, their playbooks, their focus areas, so that our clients can better position themselves within the sort of retailers' plans. With time, we've also started to do quite a lot of research in key topics and categories from a retail perspective, such as e-commerce, health and beauty, as well as private label. So on a personal level, I am hugely passionate about Africa, and I certainly dedicate every ounce of my being to make a contribution to the continent, to the growth of the continent through building and helping to really develop knowledge on business in the continent. It's something that is key to my personal statement. And I'm really fortunate to spend the past decade working, traveling, and just having a great time building business in the continent.
Thank you for that, Mac. So you've detailed there in terms of you're part of a network of consultants and the research work that you do in retail and providing solutions and strategies for your clients. Retail in Africa, or retail in general, is such a vast area of business. So if we can delve a bit deeper, so retail in Africa, where do we start? What do we need to know?
Well, retail in Africa, like many aspects of Africa, is highly dynamic, is highly nuanced. So I often steer clear of making sort of reference to sectors across Pan Africa, as one monolithic whole, because the reality is that Africa is vast and each market, has its own characteristics, and certainly from a retail perspective, each sort of market really has its own challenges and state of sort of retail maturity. But I guess, a great place to start any conversation about retail in Africa is really to frame the size and significance of the informal sector, because largely retail in Africa today is still largely informal. It is as large as 70% in Kenya. It's as high as 94% out in Nigeria, and as high as 96% in Ghana. So it is definitely significant. So even if you consider that a country such as South Africa, which is the continent's most developed market from a retail perspective, the informal sector accounts for about 24%. And we still get a lot of our clients, even from a South Africa perspective, asking us to help them make sense of the informal sector. So yes, retail in Africa is still largely informal, but no doubt it is developing, it is modernizing at its own pace. And there are some interesting success stories, even from a modern retail perspective, and how that part of the market is actually sort of moving forward.
That's some great piece of insight in terms of you've detailed retail in Africa is dynamic, it's nuanced, also detailing the significant role that the informal sector plays. So I was wondering if you can go a bit into some of the work you've done recently regarding that. You recently published Trade Intelligence's Retail in Africa special report. Yeah, so if you can tell us, what was the purpose of that report and what areas of retail in Africa did you look at?
Yeah, so this was our first sort of research report focused purely on the continent, so the scope of the report did not include South Africa. So we really were deliberate of positioning this particular report to look at the rest of Africa. And the purpose of the report was really to be a strategic guide for businesses that are looking to tap into the continent. And it's a report that helps to frame Africa's long-term economic growth story, demonstrating the kind of resilience and foresight needed to actually navigate the continent's short-term challenges. Because we do know that there are short-term challenges, and no doubt that the COVID pandemic has had a dire sort of effect on markets in Africa. But the outlook is really positive, and we really try to frame that in the special report. Then we delve into the 6 key themes that are shaping retail in Africa, as well as providing a key outlook of the main fast-moving consumer goods categories that are driving how the sort of retail sector is shaping up. So we touch on categories such as food, health and beauty, pharmaceuticals, and sort of demonstrate some of the key trends that are driving how these categories are shaping up. Lastly, then we go into a really compelling section that profiles 3 very distinct and different markets. So we cover Nigeria, Kenya, as well as Zambia. 3 very different markets from the state of retail development, very different in terms of the contribution of the informal sector versus the modern trade sector, different in terms of the key players, in the markets from a retail perspective, being local players plus global retailers, either from South Africa or from France. And that section really just helps to demonstrate what the nuances are like for clients looking to enter into Africa.
Fantastic. So you give us an idea in terms of the scope and purpose of the report regarding challenges and future outlook. When you're putting together the report, what type of person or profession of person was the report intended for?
We are really deliberate about starting each particular research report with a clear understanding of who is the report intended for.
Fantastic.
Because that then becomes the sort of basis for the kind of data that we collect and the kind of questions that we solve in the particular report. So this special report was geared towards country managers, largely country managers for multinational consumer goods companies who are either based in South Africa, looking to access new markets in the continent, either wholly new markets or markets that they've entered before and are looking for ideas of how to actually grow and to penetrate them further. Also geared towards route to market or so-called go-to-market managers. This is a title that more and more consumer goods companies are having within their teams. Roles that are focused on finding new territories and how to sort of navigate how to get product into market. It was also geared towards commercial managers who have a sort of Pan-African scope for consumer goods into Africa.
Fantastic. Before carrying out research, you're quite intentional about who you're targeting, which I know from my experience, it requires a lot of data and insight. So a lot of the work is based around gathering intelligence. How do you go about navigating this challenge of gathering accurate, fair, and reliable data in the market?
What's exciting, Tessa, is that this challenge that you raise is one that is changing at a rapid pace.
Fantastic.
So today it is a lot easier to access data on Africa. And in fact, genuinely across the globe, I think that data is certainly becoming somewhat of a commodity. So our perspective has always been that we see data as a key ingredient in the bigger recipe. And for us, a truly compelling research product or a research report is one that can unlock really compelling market insight, or as we call it, actionable insight, where rich data needs then to be married with powerful qualitative insight from experts. So our sort of research methodology, and certainly one that we used for this particular report, was to gather secondary data, primary data from a multiple number of sources, then to validate the picture that the data was telling us with face-to-face or virtual interviews with subject matter experts, not only from a retail perspective, but also in-country people that really understand what the retail landscape looks like. And then also part of the trade intelligence is that we really believe that retail is a contact sport, right? That you need to get into trade and you need to visit stores.
Definitely.
So now for this particular report, we obviously couldn't travel as much as we would have liked to because of the nature of the world at the time, but we certainly tapped into local experts on the ground to help us really unearth the why and the so what that the data was telling us.
You've beautifully detailed the challenges of gathering data and how you've found ways to not work around, but to maximize and acquire the data within the African market, which I assume is one of the nuances of doing business in Africa or business in Africa's retail space. So outside of data, what are some of the other nuances that are specific to African retail?
Yeah, so we've touched on one, which was the size and significance of the informal retail. So I think that is certainly one of the key and fundamental nuances. I think the other one is just in terms of the mix of local retail players in some of the key markets and how they are shaping up versus global retailers coming into these countries. So I will make reference to, for example, Kenya, as a retail market that we profile in the special report. So what you have is that up to 70% of Kenya's retail market is informal. And so you had a situation where South African retailers such as ShopRite have tried to enter into Kenya, and they've since pulled out. You've got Carrefour, the French-based retailer, coming into Kenya, showing some early signs of success, right? But amidst all of that, you've got some really strong local retailers who are, in many aspects, actually competing head-on and winning, against the sort of global retailers. The key outcomes of that, or certainly what we are seeing, is that there is a real need to have powerful local knowledge, of the specific retail markets. And I think more so in African markets, that to really be successful, you've got to have powerful local knowledge. And perhaps that is what is helping these local retailers to actually compete very strongly with their global counterparts.
Thank you for that, Mark. You mentioned the significance or the size of the informal sector in terms of the percentage of household retail in Africa is delivered via informal retailers. So if we can put that into, as a context, how significant is the informal sector? Is it getting bigger? Is it getting smaller? Do you believe that modernizing informal trade is key to unlocking economic welfare?
This is a really powerful question, Tessa, because it is one that, certainly when we were writing this particular report, was a discussion that we had as a team. So covering your first part of the question, right? So I framed the sort of relative size of the informal sector in key markets like Kenya, Nigeria, Ghana,
yes,
and South Africa. And certainly it is getting smaller, but it is getting smaller at a very slow pace. And I think what we've always said to our clients is that instead of waiting for it to transform into a modern retail landscape, it's really around trying to understand what informal is today and how you can play in it. Our perspective is that, from an African retail perspective, there is always going to be these two worlds of informal and modern trade. And certainly for the next 5 to 10 years, we still see informal being a significant component of the retail sector. Now, whether modernizing the trade is key to unlocking economic sort of welfare, it's a really key question, and one that is not straightforward to answer. So, for instance, we profile a French retailer called Auchan,
yes,
who had entered into Senegal a few years ago, and they had gone in with a slightly different approach to how the likes of Carrefour and ShopRite have actually sort of entered into new markets, where they would look to focus on the key cities, look to service consumers in the key cities with slightly higher priced products versus the informal trade. So Auchan went into Senegal and they built out discount supermarket and convenience stores, particularly aimed at underserved areas, targeting consumers that would have traditionally shopped at small local vendors in the informal sector. And they were met with large-scale sort of resistance with looting of their stores.
Oh, wow.
So some of the articles that I read really sort of position this as local traders seeing it as modern-day colonization. Here is a French retailer looking to basically take food out of our mouths.
Okay.
And then you've got a market like Angola, where the sort of retail market has formalized significantly due to deliberate government efforts around forcing traders to have licenses, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the question is, in both of those sort of examples, are traders better off due to the modernization of the retail sector? And the answer is not straightforward, right? But our perspective is that there is the opportunity for both informal and modern trade to coexist. And I think there is some really interesting ways that technology could potentially do that. I think that, there's some nice examples of how, in a market like Angola, for example, where the sort of modernization of the cash and carry segment of retail now has created a ability for the informal traders to purchase from the cash and carry at prices that are still favorable, prices that still work for them to actually be able to sell to their communities. So I think there is certainly a sense that there needs to be a somewhat win-win situation, because what we do know is that these markets not only contribute to the sustenance of communities, but they are our version of small-scale entrepreneurship, and I think that's important.
I totally agree. You've detailed there the informal sector is getting smaller. It's also evolving. And you've raised a very interesting question regarding, are traders better off with the modernization of the retail sector? With that in mind, how do we go about integrating offline and online retail channels in Africa without leaving people behind?
Yeah, so as mentioned, I think that technology perhaps is that key connector, right? So as you know, that Africa has always leapfrogged technology, and with fairly high levels of mobile penetration, we see technology as almost being able to create some really exciting omni-channel sort of retail opportunities, emerging offline as well as online worlds. So if you look at mobile penetration today, broadly across the continent, it is forecast to reach 51% in 2025. Yeah. But if you look at it from a market perspective, markets like Kenya have penetration upwards of 85-90%. So. And what we're seeing in those kind of markets is that simple, inclusive technologies such as WhatsApp are being used by both consumers and traders, to almost, to have transactions happening, to have orders happening. So really simple technologies that are helping to almost, to actually connect the two worlds together. And then also from a sort of modern retail perspective, you have the likes of Carrefour partnering with Jumia, to offer on-demand delivery in Kenya, for instance. So, yeah, there's no doubt that technology is going to be the key unlocker. And I think with the Africans' natural, fast adoption of technology, this is going to be a really sort of exciting space to see.
I totally agree with that. So I was wondering, from your experience, can you give us some real-life examples of how technology has played a role in the development of the African retail sector?
So a sort of really nice example is a technology startup called Kueza. It is spelled Kuueza. It's an Accra-based startup and digital hub, which enables businesses in the informal and formal sectors to trade and build their value chains locally. The startup aims to make sure that African micro and small to medium-sized businesses can trade more with one another, as well as enter new markets, either new cities locally or even cross-border. So it helps to connect buyers and sellers, retailers to consumers and manufacturers using a simple mobile and web application tailored for the informal sector. So, this is a really simple sort of example of startups that are seeing this opportunity to almost connect the worlds of online, offline, but also informal as well as modern trade.
I love that. I always love hearing about tech solutions which provide genuine solutions to African problems, especially from founders who are based on the continent as well. So thank you for that example, Matt. With that in mind, we always read and hear quotes about Africa's growing middle class, fastest growing economies, rapid adoption of technology. Do these stats actually translate to direct opportunities of growth in sectors such as retail?
So I'd like to start that question by quoting one of the foremost experts on the African consumer, Mr. Faye Olubodong, based in Lagos, Nigeria, who spoke at one of our webinars recently. And he was asked about this myth or, element of the sort of growing middle class. And Faye made reference to research that he had seen. I think it was a Fitch Solutions piece of research on a element called the dependency index, which is basically the measure of how many individuals would depend on a single source of income. So, for instance, this study was done in Africa and parts of the West, and the findings were quite interesting. So, for example, in the West, the index is 1.5, meaning that for one middle class source of income, there is only 1.5% of people that actually depend on it. Now, that kind of makes sense. The systems in the West are geared, to support the individual. The system will take care of you, kind of thing. Whereas in Africa, right, we are culturally communal.
Yes.
And also, perhaps because the systems aren't really geared at this stage to take care of us all, the dependency index is 8. So for the average middle class income in Africa, 8 people are depending on it.
Oh, wow.
Now that's it. Yeah. So that is really, really interesting because that despite the size of the middle class in Africa, yes, it is big in terms, from a size perspective, but the purchasing power is vastly different versus the West. So in fact, Faye says that that if you want to scale your consumer goods business in Africa, for example, that you really need to target that bottom of the pyramid for you to win share. So it's just a nice sort of context to this topic around the sort of middle class.
Yeah. So I guess with that in mind, there is a growing middle class, but the African middle class potentially has a less disposable income because they have more dependents. Yep. So with that in mind, I guess if you are going into Africa within an industry such as retail, your consumer base would probably be scaling at a slower pace. So your projections of scaling quick might not be as realized. So you're probably looking at a long-term game, which is something I've seen you quote before, that playing in Africa is a long-term game. So I was thinking, with that in mind, can you tell us what you mean by a long-term game and the strategies brands can implement to achieve success in Africa?
Yes, certainly. So I'll start off by making reference to a company called Toleram, a Singapore-based business which entered Nigeria in the 1970s.
Fantastic. They're part of Nigerian culture now.
Yes, exactly. Now, what is great about this story is that they launched noodles in 1970s when the category was fairly nascent and local consumers had no idea what noodles were. It was not something that was consumed there. Yet they took a long-term bet on Nigeria, and today, 50 years later, they have built a business that is generating over $1 billion, has 13 plants and over 1,000 fleet of trucks. And I think that this is a great example of a company that came in early and really took a bet on Africa to great success. Now, the other one is a business called Diageo. Diageo, it's a leading multinational beverage company. I had the pleasure of working at Diageo in Africa, actually. And I got to see the kind of success that they have built in the continent. Now, they started in Africa in 1820s when Guinness was first shipped to Sierra Leone in 1820s. Johnny Walker, their leading whiskey, started shipping to Kenya in the 1890s. Then they built their first brewery, their first Guinness brewery, out in Nigeria in 1962. Today, Diageo is generating over 12% of their group revenue from Africa. They are generating 2.6 billion pounds in revenue, and they have a staff complement of 6,500 people working for them in the continent. Now, what these companies have in common, Teresa, is that beyond their patience and long-term focus, they have been bold enough to shape the future. And, there's no doubt that Africa is the innovators' playground with many nascent opportunities in all major markets. And,
yes,
those curious pioneers can really shape the future of categories, the future of consumption, really creating compelling solutions that can service the continent going forward. So we believe that these three things of looking to innovate early, looking to innovate around local culture, tastes, and preferences, looking to innovate around local consumption occasions, are some of the simple principles that businesses can actually look to adopt today, to actually kind of reap the long-term benefits that are there.
Thank you for the great examples of brands that are winning in Africa. So if we keep with the theme of success in Africa, you've detailed some of the big or key brands in Africa that are winning. So if we step outside of brands and look at retailers, which retailers are winning in Africa and what have they done differently to ensure that they win?
Sure. This really speaks to the kind of dynamism that is here currently with retail, because the answer to this question 5 years ago, would certainly have been very, very different. So there is no doubt that the biggest retail success story in Africa is still ShopRite Group, who are based in South Africa. And I think even though they have started to sort of pull back out of key markets in the west parts of Africa as well as East Africa, seemingly looking to really consolidate their strength in Southern Africa, the SADC region. But if you look at their total store footprint across the continent, it is still by far the sort of biggest, right? And they are really seen as catalysts in terms of sort of retail innovation. Certainly here in South Africa, they are among some of the most innovative retailers globally. The other one would be Carrefour. Carrefour has taken a slightly different approach to some of the other retailers, where they have chosen to enter into Africa through a franchise partnership with Dubai-based business called Majid Al Futtaim, and they are rapidly growing their presence in East Africa with great success. So it does look like there is something interesting about this sort of partnership model, and perhaps it sort of connects back to the point around tapping into local knowledge, which a partnership model can actually give you. And we've seen very, very recently that Pick n Pay, another South African retailer, has just entered into Nigeria through a partnership with a local player. Then I guess taking a step away from the global retailers, there are some really interesting stories of local retailers who are doing well. And in Kenya, a local retailer called Naivas is rapidly, cementing its leadership of the modern retail market in Kenya. They have grown their store footprint to close to 80 stores now. And so if you go to that market and you see the stores that they've built, high quality shopping experiences, really genuine modern trade, selection in terms of ranging, fresh produce, the kind of stores that you can find in suburbs in the UK, kind of modernity. So I think that is a great example of a local retailer that is really competing with the global retailers and doing very well.
Thank you for that insight. I guess key to succeeding is having the right products, range, and categories. So where do you believe the potential for growth is in the African retail sector in terms of products, range, and categories, and why?
So if you consider the fact that the continent is experiencing a significant demographic shift, the population is due to reach 2.5 billion people in 2050. And I think that's going to sort of account for about 28% of the global population. And with that, you've got, massive movements into cities, so that the cities will continue to grow and really become growth centers. So looking at the numbers, in Africa, food is certainly the leading category. Food today, it accounts for 58% of total retail sales. In 2021, the food category was valued at $715 billion and is forecast to reach $1 trillion in 2026.
Oh, wow.
And so, food is definitely going to be a key category, that will drive the sector forward. And I think it's going to be really key, right, because it has to sustain this growing population in the cities. Within food, the leading categories are, for example, confectionery and snacks, bread and cereal products, all of which are contributing over 37% of that contribution, followed by meat as well as vegetable products. So we say to our clients that if you are in the consumer goods space, no doubt food as a category is certainly one to watch. The other category, just quickly, that is shaping up really nicely is the personal care segment. Now, what COVID did, it obviously sort of really brought to the fore some of the hygiene and health sort of needs that the population has. And what we're seeing from the numbers is that that over time, that more and more Africans will have access to better healthcare services, et cetera, et cetera. So I think coupled with that, the personal care and health categories are really going to be interesting. We are seeing some great innovation in terms of local superfoods like moringa, which are being packaged in really compelling packaging and sold in the sort of retail chains as well. So I think those two categories are really, really interesting to the future growth of the retail sector.
Beautifully. So you've detailed that growing populations will drive growth in specific categories. If we're being specific, which African markets are we likely to see this growth?
So I think in terms of which African markets are likely to see growth, certainly one of those would be Kenya. Kenya is certainly regarded as the second most developed or formalized retail market in Africa after South Africa. Just in terms of retail penetration, 30% of the market is, I guess, what we call sort of modern trade. And over the past decade, there's been rapid expansion by local players as well as global players, as I've mentioned sort of earlier on. And I think what's important about Kenya is that as well, it sort of provides a significant gateway to the other markets within that East African community, which has a combined total population of over 120 million people. So Kenya being a lead market for the region and it having a very dynamic retail sort of landscape, I think makes it certainly a market that I would look at for the future. The other one, it is impossible not to ignore Nigeria just because of the size of its consumer market. The sort of modern retail sector is still fairly small. It's only about 6% of retail today, but I think that the sort of demographics of that market make it really, really interesting. However, it's important to obviously temper the positivity just with a firm understanding of the perhaps relative complexity of entering a market such as Nigeria. We always suggest to our clients to have a portfolio of markets that has a combination of high growth, slightly higher risk markets with those that are perhaps seen as less risky, yet the sort of rewards might be slightly lower. But those two markets certainly would be ones that I'd be looking at for the future of retail.
Is that growth driven by local African players, or are we seeing international companies and investors coming in and actualizing that growth?
So I think in Kenya, certainly, growth is today certainly driven by local players, but certainly Carrefour is growing very, very quickly. My sort of personal perspective is that we are perhaps likely to see some sort of consolidation, where either a big global player would sort of look at buying into or buying out some of those successful local players, Then if you look at Nigeria, I think that as much as there are a handful of local supermarket chains that are starting to build out store footprints of 5 or 10 stores, I certainly see the future growth coming from global players or South African retailers going back into Nigeria, perhaps with slightly different business models, perhaps with a sort of partnership or a franchise kind of model, with a local player that understands the local market better. So two slightly different perspectives for the two markets.
So the growth is currently driven by local players, and you've detailed there in terms of future growth might be delivered via partnerships of international companies, investors, and local players. So if you look outside of the actual retailers and look at brands, what are the opportunities for African brands to expand into other African markets?
So I think, there is a definite sense that the sort of made in Africa proposition could gain momentum. And I think it would be great for the continent if that happened. There was some research I had seen recently where there's definite interest from consumers, towards local African brands. And I think also with the Continental Free Trade Agreement, I think, just if you consider that, if we can really realize the opening up of our borders and trade between African countries, was to increase, I think that really should spur on local African brands, to really start to grow into big Pan-African brands, which can then, with time, become global brands, So I think there's a lot of excitement from a brand perspective, and I think that there is consumer interest in local African brands as well.
So you touched upon after there. If we consider after and the theme of growth from local players, local brands, what role do you believe after will play in the future of African retail?
Well, this could be the unlock that we've been waiting for. I think that it is perhaps the one big shift that can really sort of realize the African Union's ideal of the Africa that we want. Many of the retailers that we have spoken to have spoken to the challenges around supply chain and moving goods, from markets into other markets, the sort of barrier that duties sometimes has on the commercials, some markets have made it less possible for sort of retailers to import certain brand of products in order to drive local production, of certain categories. And I think, there is sort of merit in both sides of that perspective, right? That we need to look at like encouraging local production, but also I think that we need to just encourage the free movements of goods and services. So I think After is certainly going to play a significant role in that. However, there are going to be some challenges. I think that our ports and the blockages that we're seeing, in our ports, our road networks, aren't perhaps ready for the kind of sort of benefits that could accrue, from this continental free trade agreement.
I totally agree. I'm extremely optimistic about After. And I mention it most weeks on the show. I don't think there's a week that goes by that I don't discuss the opportunities and some of the challenges that After has, or some of the challenges of implementing After. So I think After is something that we can definitely look forward to as a future contributor to the economic growth of Africa. So if we keep to the theme of the future of Africa, where do you see Africa in 5 years' time from a retail perspective?
So I see three key themes, right? I think one is that sort of retail market will continue to slowly formalize. And I think that's exciting.
Yes.
Because I think it is really going to a sense of dynamism to the key cities. And of course, as more and more Africans move into cities, I think that a growing sort of modern retail sector is something that is certainly going to happen, in the cities. But with that, I certainly see this ideal of a integrated informal and modern trade world where traders and the modern trade landscape can actually coexist, and either through technology that the two worlds succeed for the benefit of communities, for traders, for business, for investors. Right? I don't think that it's a case of a winner takes all kind of scenario. The other one is I see, that the local retailers and the global retailers or South African retailers would almost consolidate into becoming regional retailers. Some would be strong in East Africa, others would be strong in West Africa, and others would be strong in Southern Africa. I think that because the markets are so nuanced, right? I think that we're going to have regional players versus a single retailer that's going to be dominant across the entire continent. That's my own sort of prediction here. Then lastly, I think that the retail shelves would be certainly stocked with more and more locally made African brands. I see next 5 years that when you walk into a supermarket in Lagos or in Nairobi, that what you'll see on shelf is certainly a bigger contribution of local made African brands on the shelves, sitting side by side with some of the biggest global brands that we know.
Fantastic. That's a very beautiful and insightful image of the future of African retail, and one that I think is extremely achievable in the next 5 years' time. So if we look closer to home, where do you see yourself, Trade Intelligence, Pengo Insights in 5 years' time?
Certainly a very interesting stage of our business. From a trade intelligence perspective, about 95% of our work is in South Africa. And we have certainly started for the past 12 months to look beyond South Africa and to really hold our clients' hands as their trusted growth partner, into Africa. So certainly our business and the kind of solutions that we help our clients with are going to become just increasingly more Africa-facing. We are passionate about retail, and we are certainly passionate about Africa. And we see ourselves as really playing a central role in connecting our clients, to the kind of opportunities that we've spoken about here from a retail perspective. And I think part of that is that if you consider that we spend our time really studying what the retailers are doing, there are very few other agencies that are as obsessed about trying to understand what the retailers are doing, what their strategies are, so what their playbooks are. And I think it's quite exciting that if you think about some of the retailers that are spoken about here today in parts of Kenya or even Nigeria, that we are going to start to almost shed light on what are they doing, what are the opportunities that they are bringing for the consumer goods players, what are the brands that they are stocking, So I think the work that we do is certainly going to make a big, big difference. For me personally, I am very fortunate to say that I am certainly operating in my purpose. My purpose statement is slap bang on the kind of work that I'm doing now. Building knowledge on business in the continent, and whether that is retail today, it is certainly going to morph into other sectors. I think that there are other sectors that are really, really exciting. So I certainly see myself doing more and more of this kind of work and just having a bigger impact just on the continent.
Brilliant. And I deeply and sincerely believe that you'll achieve so much, because I've seen your passion and purpose for working within this industry, and you've achieved quite a lot whilst I've known you. So the next 5 years' time, I think you'll achieve even more.
Quote of the week.
As people, we often have quotes, mantras, African proverbs, or even affirmations that keep us going when times are challenging or even when times are good. Do you have one that you can share with us today?
There is one that is very dear to my heart, and it goes that knowledge is a garden, and if it is not cultivated, you can't harvest it. And it's such a key quote or proverb, right? Because I fundamentally believe, and I came across a TED talk actually titled around this, that Africa does not have a sort of resource problem, poverty problem, food problem, or a water problem. What we have is a problem of knowledge, right? How is it possible that a continent with access to significant hectares of fertile land has parts of our population that are very hungry? It's those kind of things that really, should drive us towards building knowledge capacity in finding solutions, right? Because I think that the solutions are certainly within our grasp. solutions that are going to drive our continent forward. So we need to cultivate it and we need to harvest it.
That's a beautiful proverb to end on. And as we're coming to the end of the conversation, do you have any closing remarks and final calls to action for people who are interested in exploring Africa's retail space or are already in Africa's retail space?
Well, I must say, first of all, to you, Pesa, this is a fantastic platform. The kind of conversations that I had on this platform are very, very important. So first of all, thank you to you.
Thank you.
So to anyone listening, in closing, we are certainly bullish about the continent. We have a long-term view on Africa. And I think that those that have a long-term perspective and are willing to shape the future today by starting today, right, will certainly reap the benefits for the future. And I think when I think about what those benefits are, we need to be conscious of the fact that there are significant business opportunities, right? But business, I believe, can have a profound impact on societies, a positive impact on societies. And I fundamentally believe that if we make Africa a global investors' destination, a safe destination for global investment, and business can thrive, then absolutely our people can thrive. Those 2.5 billion people that are going to be making up the population need us to drive this continent forward and to make it realize its growth potential. So if any of you are keen to get in touch with me and to work through some ideas or some solutions about how we could do that for your business or for your business problem, please get in touch with me at mac@tradeintelligence.co.za. And I would love to hear from you so we can support you.
What an amazing way to close today's conversation. Thank you, Mac. That has been an extremely enlightening and enjoyable conversation. One that has been packed full of value and insight. It's focused on an industry that is close to my heart, as I spent many years working as a buyer and in supply chain for retail. So once again, thank you, Mac, for giving us your valuable time, sharing your knowledge with us. It's been a pleasure hosting you on the platform.
Thank you very much, Tessa.
Take care, and we will speak soon.
Cheers now. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you to everyone who has listened and stayed tuned to the podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share, or tell a friend about it. You can also rate, review us in Apple Podcasts or wherever you download your podcast. Thank you, and see you next week for the Unlocking Africa podcast.